Welcome to Ethan's Revenge Domain.
He has a Harvard MBA. You'll understand. That's what the HR manager said as she pushed the printed offer adjustment across the wobbling laminate table in that airless little meeting room that always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and dry erase marker. Her voice had that tired, practiced sympathy HR people use when they've said the same line 30 times this quarter, and it's never landed well once. One sentence on that page told me everything I needed to know about how this company truly valued experience. Senior Reliability Engineer, 11 years tenure, compensation aligned to internal equity. Internal equity, in this case, meant I was being paid barely more than half of what the new strategic intern I just finished training was bragging about in his group chat. Same job title, 2 years out of grad school, no ship systems, no pager scars, but he had a Harvard MBA, so apparently gravity worked differently around him. His package is benchmarked against top-tier leadership programs, HR said without quite looking at me, eyes fixed on the checklist clipped to her folder. You'll understand. These credentials command a different market. The way she said you'll understand landed like a command, not a prediction. Meant, accept the insult and stay quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice or list off the incidents I'd carried alone while everyone else slept. The near misses that never hit a dashboard because I caught them in logs at 2:40 a.m. The patches that kept our transaction platform from collapsing on 3 consecutive Black Fridays. I didn't recite the pats with my name on them, or the customer renewal where the VP had said we stayed only because your platform never goes down. Instead, I opened my folder, slid out the single sheet of paper I'd printed the night before, and signed it with a calm, steady hand. Then I pushed it back across the table with a small, almost pleasant smile. This is my resignation, I said. Effective 12:45 p.m. today. By 12:47 p.m., my badge buzzed red at the security gate and the reader flashed access REVOKED. By 12:52 p.m., my VPN connection dropped and my terminal session died mid-log tail. My accounts closed one by one, neat, efficient, exactly like we designed the offboarding workflow to behave for non-critical staff. By 1:15 p.m., the CEO's assistant was sprinting through the parking lot in 3-inch heels, hair coming loose, waving both arms and yelling my name like her whole career depended on me stopping the car. By 3:00 p.m., 9 people from the Internal Equity Committee were sitting around a glass-walled boardroom table, staring at a projected incident report that started at 12:45 p.m. with my resignation timestamp and ended with the phrase, "Critical production failure company-wide outage projected revenue impact, $47 million. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and show you how a quiet, underpaid systems engineer became the most expensive line item in his company's history by doing nothing more dramatic than walking away. Before that, if you like stories where the people who actually understand how things work end up giving very painful lessons to the ones who don't, you might want to hit that subscribe button. There are a lot more tales like this, and you don't want to miss the part where a single signature on a resignation letter wipes out an executive team's entire bonus pool for the year. My name is not the one they wrote on the patents, and it's definitely not the one they mentioned in investor calls. Internally, most people just called me Railton, because my full name, Ethan Railton, was apparently too much effort in Slack, and there were always at least 2 other Ethans floating around the org. I was 45 when this all happened. I'd spent the last 2 decades making sure other people's promises stayed true, that the checkout button worked, that balances stayed accurate, that when a customer hit submit payment, the money actually moved where it should when it should. My path in wasn't pretty. No Ivy League crest on my degree, no framed photos of me shaking hands with famous tech CEOs. I went to a public university that most recruiters only recognize when they're hiring locally. Before that, I spent 4 years in the Navy, crawling through overheated steel corridors to keep radar and communications equipment alive on a ship that would have preferred to retire 10 years earlier. Hardware didn't care how tired you were, who you knew, or what your compensation band looked like. It either worked or it didn't. If it didn't, you fixed it or the mission failed. Simple. After the Navy, I bounced between two small data shops and a regional ISP, the kind of places where you do everything from swapping drives at 3 a.m. to writing bash scripts to keep ancient cron jobs limping along. Then I landed at a mid-sized SaaS company called Northline Commerce Systems. On the outside, the website talked about powering modern digital revenue experiences. On the inside, what that actually meant was, if we went down, retail chains across 3 continents stopped taking payments, inventory fell out of sync, and our customers' executives started making phone calls that could ruin careers. I joined Northline as a mid-level back-end engineer. Back then, the office still fit into 2 floors and the founders still walked the halls. We had one application that everyone pretended was service-oriented because it sounded good, but it was a monolith with features bolted on wherever there was space. We had a handful of brittle cron jobs in place of real pipelines, and a primary database that nearly cried every November. I made myself useful. I took the on-call slots nobody wanted, volunteered for weekend deployments, grabbed the weird, ugly incident tickets other people nudged aside. I asked questions, traced logs, read code nobody touched anymore because the original author had left 3 years before I arrived. I learned every integration, every hack, every invisible assumption the system depended on. People started saying, "Ask Railton, he'll know." At first it was a joke. Eventually it became reflex. The first time I truly understood how much weight I was quietly carrying was during a regional outage that dropped half our East Coast transactions on a Saturday night. We were bleeding money by the minute in SLA penalties. I'd been at the company less than a year. The root of the problem turned out to be a message queue nobody monitored because it never failed. It had failed silently, corrupting a backlog of events. I traced it, fixed the corruption path, restarted the right services in the right order, and limped us back to life before Sunday morning. The founder sent a single-line email. "Nice work. Customers never saw a thing." That was the template. My job, unofficially, was to make sure customers never saw the chaos behind our perfectly normal web front ends. Over the years, my title shifted. Back-end engineer became senior engineer, became principal reliability lead. HR got very creative with wording, always finding job titles that sounded important but landed one band below the pay grade that would actually reflect what I was doing. On paper, I was senior infrastructure specialist. In practice, I wrote the runbooks people followed when everything went sideways at 3:07 a.m. I put together our incident playbooks, designed the dashboards operations relied on, and built a monitoring stack that screamed before things broke instead of after. I learned our failure modes the expensive way, through real outages and real 4 a.m. war rooms. There was the time a cloud provider changed timeouts on a managed service without warning and half our calls suddenly started hanging. The time a partner's API quietly added rate limits the day before a big holiday sale. The time someone in finance tested a new billing script on the production database by running it with the wrong where clause. Whenever things went wrong, I took notes. Not because I was plotting revenge, but because that's what my brain does. I kept logs of timelines, graphs, root causes. I built my own incident journal, on paper, in my own handwriting. Every page a pattern. What failed, why it failed, what warning signs had been ignored. Then Northline decided it was time to grow up. The board brought in a new CEO, Connor Black. Fast-talking, camera-ready, the kind of guy who could weave ecosystem, synergies, and monetization pathways into a single sentence without once referring to the actual systems that made any of it possible. He brought in a new CFO, a new Chief People Officer, and a slogan: "We need to professionalize." To them, professionalizing had 2 main components. First, they wanted resumes with brand names on them. Elite MBAs, top-tier consulting firms, people who knew how to talk to investors. Second, they wanted standardized compensation structures aligned to the market, which translated to pay people based on pedigree, not on what happens when they're not in the room. Engineering did not escape. Suddenly, we had program managers armed with PowerPoint decks and risk registers, people who looked great in steering committee meetings but had never tailed a log file or debugged a race condition. They loved to talk about aligning incentives and maximizing throughput, but if you handed them SSH credentials, they'd stare like you'd given them a set of alien symbols. Meanwhile, I kept doing what I'd always done, quietly fixing things. The first sign of where this was headed came when they launched a leadership acceleration program. It targeted high-potential early career talent, which, in plain English, meant new grads from schools they could name-drop to the board. These hires got rotations, executive mentors, and compensation packages that made a lot of older engineers quietly open their benefits portals and look at their own numbers. One of those hires was a guy named Brendan Cole, 24. Harvard MBA with a rushed computer science minor he'd squeezed in for optics. He was sharp, no doubt, but sharp the way a case study kid is sharp, great at frameworks, less great when confronted with a production incident that didn't follow the script. He'd done a summer at a big-name consulting firm and had slides to prove it. They hired Brendan as a product strategy associate. 6 months later, his title changed to product strategy manager. 9 months after that, he was director of strategic initiatives. Somewhere in that ascent, somebody decided he should own several cross-functional programs, including one touching our payments platform. He got direct access to Connor. He got invited to leadership offsites. He also got right access through an initiative to systems he didn't really understand. The second sign came in the form of a spreadsheet, wrapped in corporate speak, delivered as a memo. Brendan had authored an internal comparison of legacy engineering compensation versus strategic talent market benchmarks. The data was anonymized in theory, but with so few people in my band, it wasn't difficult to decode. That's when I saw it in numbers. 11 years in, my total comp was barely scraping the bottom of what the leadership track hires, Brendan especially, got in their first year. He was being paid roughly 60% more than me. On paper, our titles looked almost parallel. I didn't confront anyone, not publicly. I did what I always do, wrote it down. The shove came about 3 months later in that little HR room. Ethan, the HR business partner said. Her name was Marina, and she always carried 3 devices and looked like her inbox was on fire. We've completed our annual compensation review. We're bringing your package into alignment with internal equity guidelines. She slid the offer sheet across the table. A 2% bump, that was it. Internal equity, I asked, though I already knew the answer. She took a breath, forcing herself to look me in the eye. We have to maintain fairness across the organization. The leadership track hires come in with certain credentials. Their market value is Harvard MBAs, I finished for her. She hesitated, then nodded. You'll understand, their market value is different. And mine, I asked. 11 years here. Built and maintained the systems that your new folks are being told they own. What's that worth? You have stability, she said, dropping the glossy tone for something more human. Institutional knowledge, job security. And 60% of their pay, I said. She winced. If this doesn't work for you, the options on the table are to accept it or leave, I finished. I'd expected those words. That's why my folder wasn't empty. I pulled out my resignation letter, placing it neatly on top of the offer page. I'll take the second option, I said, effective 12:45 p.m. today. Marina stared at the letter like it was a live server with a warning sticker she wasn't qualified to touch. You don't have to decide right now, she said quickly. Think about it, talk to your manager, we can revisit. We can't, I cut in calm. You just told me in writing and out loud how the company values me. I believe you. And I'm adjusting accordingly. Her shoulders sagged. HR people always get pinned between terrible policies and the workers those policies grind down. Will you at least stay through the end of the quarter, she asked. Help with handoffs, your projects. My projects are fully documented, I said. The runbooks are up to date. The on-call rotations are staffed. The resignation is effective today. At 12:45 p.m., security killed my badge. The overhead sensor flashed red when I tried it on my way back from the meeting, a little symbol that I was now officially an outsider. I packed 2 plants, my own keyboard, my coffee mug, and one notebook that mattered more than any of it, my handwritten incident journal. 11 years of outages, weird edge cases, undocumented dependencies, and if this ever happens again, do this first notes. None of that lived in Jira. Jira was for what management wanted the world to look like. My notebook was for what the system actually did. At 12:47 p.m., my Slack session disconnected. At 12:52 p.m., my email client popped up an authentication error and kicked me out. At 12:58 p.m., something important broke. I didn't see it from inside this time. I saw it from the outside, the way a merchant would, through a public status page I had architected 3 years earlier, and which I knew down to the wording of every incident state. Northline's status dashboard flipped from all systems operational to a cautious yellow banner, investigating elevated error rates in transaction processing. I sat in my aging sedan on level 3 of the parking garage, engine off, watching the updates roll. I could picture the graphs behind them, latency spikes on the transaction pipeline, queue depths climbing, error codes propagating through services like a cascade. There is a particular shape to this kind of failure you learn only by living with the system. Normally, this would be when my phone lit up. Someone from SRE would ping me with "seeing something weird, you around?" And I'd already be halfway logged in, head full of likely culprits. The little idempotency service that everyone forgot existed, but without which duplicate payments would explode. The exact sequence of restarts needed to prevent its cache from poisoning. The configuration flag that prevented it from rerouting to a stale shard. I'd raised concerns about that service 3 times in the last 2 years. Each time I documented its fragility, suggested we re-architect it or at least build stronger guardrails. Each time I'd been told, "Great idea, let's put that on the roadmap for next quarter." I wasn't on that roadmap anymore. The pager on my belt belonged to my new employer now, a B2B infrastructure company that had responded to my casual, just exploring message months ago with, "If you ever want to work somewhere that values reliability as a first-class feature, we should talk." We de-talked. They made an offer. I'd accepted, pending the question, "When can you start?" Now I had an exact answer. At 1:05 p.m., I forwarded my signed new offer PDF from my personal inbox to a safe archive, looked once more at Northline's trembling status banner, and put my car in reverse. At 1:15 p.m., I was rolling toward the exit of the parking structure when I caught sight of someone in a blazer and skirt sprinting across the concrete, waving frantically. It was the CEO's assistant, Hannah Lynn. Normally flawless, composed, the quiet power behind Connor's calendar. Right now she looked like she'd run a 400-meter dash in business attire. She reached my window, breathless palms slapping lightly against the glass to get my attention. I rolled it down. "Ethan, please, stop," she gasped. "We need you upstairs right now." "Hannah, I don't work here anymore," I said, keeping my tone level. "You disabled my badge 10 minutes ago." Her eyes were wide, bright with panic. "The payments platform is failing globally. Major clients can't process orders. The board's on a call. They're asking who owns the pipeline and your name is all over every diagram." She swallowed. "Connor needs you in the war room," he said. "Get him back in here. I don't care what it takes." I glanced at the dashboard clock. 1:16 p.m. "Do you remember what HR said?" I asked. "Accept it or leave." "This isn't the time for principle," she said, catching herself before saying petty. "We can fix the comp issue later. Please just come up for an hour. Consult." "Wheel, you'll make it worth my time," I finished. "You had 11 years to make it worth my time." Hannah's expression hardened for a heartbeat, the panic flickering into something closer to anger. "You can't just walk away while the whole platform burns," she said. "I walked away while my personal boundary was burning," I replied. "What's happening now is a system responding to choices it's been warning you about for years. My deck about the idempotency service, the risk register entry you downgraded. The repeated 'we'll do it next quarter' replies." She opened her mouth, closed it. "If Connor wants to speak with me," I said, "he can contact me through my new employer. They'll be delighted to bill you market rate for production critical consulting." I nodded toward her phone, "Assuming you still have a network connection to make the call." I rolled up the window gently. eased the car forward and watched her shrink in the rear-view mirror, standing in a pool of harsh afternoon light, clutching her phone like a lifeline. At 1:22 p.m., Northline's status page turned red. Major outage. Transaction processing unavailable for many customers. We are working to restore service as quickly as possible. At 1:30 p.m., my personal phone buzzed with a message from a former teammate. Whatever you just did, good on you. They're melted. Connor just shouted, how did we let the only person who understands this system walk over a comp band? I locked the screen and drove to the offices of my new company, Varison Labs, where they'd set up a quiet desk, a welcome kit, and an onboarding schedule that included time with their senior leadership, not to motivate me, but to understand what I needed to do my best work. By 2:00 p.m., screenshots of broken checkout flows started circulating on social media. Merchants complained in carefully worded posts about issues with a third-party payments provider. Developers made dark jokes about move fast and break revenue. By 2:30 p.m., the first tech news outlet posted a headline, Northline Commerce experiences major outage impacting retail transactions across regions. Inside Northline, 9 people were now in a boardroom with legal and investor relations, watching graphs they didn't know how to interpret and trying not to panic on camera. Later, I saw the internal notes from that meeting. A friend still inside sent them to me on his last day before he, too, resigned. 3:02 p.m., emergency call with board. Connor opened with forced composure. We're dealing with a critical production failure in our core transaction system. Estimated revenue impact is currently $47 million and rising. We need to align on status and recovery options. The SVP of engineering, a man named Lionel Carr who'd been hired from a failed competitor, tried for his calm technical voice. We've identified an unexpected failure in part of the transaction pipeline. The team is working around the clock to. Who exactly is on this team? Interrupted one board member, a woman named Frances Hall who'd made her fortune in enterprise software and had no patience for buzzwords. Give me names and roles. Lionel hesitated. We have our SRE lead, Raj Patel, coordinating along with several senior engineers from. Where is Railton? Frances asked. Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't come from bad audio. Ethan resigned this morning, Marina said quietly from her corner, effective immediately. Resigned or pushed? Frances' tone was icier now. He resigned, Marina replied. His compensation adjustment didn't meet expectations. What adjustment? Frances asked. 2%, Marina said. Frances actually laughed, a short, humorless sound. You gave a 2% raise to the only engineer who understands your core payment system during the same review cycle where you hired Harvard MBAs at leadership track salaries, and you're surprised he left. Connor tried to steer things back. We can dissect our compensation philosophy later. Right now No, Frances cut in. We are dissecting it now because it is directly related to why we're losing 8 figures in revenue today. Lionel, what exactly has failed? Lionel pulled up a diagram. Our impotency coordination service is stuck in a bad state. We've tried restarting it, but we're seeing cache corruption. We think there may be undocumented dependencies on earlier versions. What's the tested restart procedure? Frances asked. We're working on reconstructing it, Lionel said. Documentation exists, but there are gaps. You don't have a working runbook, Frances said. For a service that sits in the middle of your payment path. We have partial documentation, Lionel said defensively. Some of the specifics were known primarily to Ethan. One of the other board members, a venture guy named Mark, leaned into his webcam. So what I'm hearing is, a critical system was effectively owned mentally by one senior engineer who resigned today, and you never extracted that knowledge or compensated him like the linchpin he was. Is that accurate? The CFO, Lena, looked up from her laptop. Current estimated impact stands at $47 million in lost and delayed transactions. If this isn't resolved by close of business, we're looking at contractual penalties from key customers that could add another $12 to $15 million. Can we get Ethan back? Connor asked, looking at Marina and Hannah. I tried, Hannah said. I reached him in the garage. He said he doesn't work here anymore and that any further engagement should go through his new employer. He used the phrase market rate for his expertise. His new employer, Connor's voice went thin. When did he get a new employer? Today, Hannah said simply. Mark leaned back. So let me summarize. You underpaid the architect of your most critical revenue system for more than a decade. You told him to accept it or leave. He left. Hours later, the system fails in precisely the way he'd been flagging as a risk. And now, after losing tens of millions, you're wondering how to get him back on any terms at all. Connor turned to the general counsel, Devin. Is there anything in his IP assignments we can lean on? Any obligation to assist with incident response? Devin shook his head. He assigned code and architectural IP to the company as standard. Knowledge and skills aren't IP. You can't legally compel him to participate in incident response as a former employee. Any attempt to pressure him could be construed as retaliation, and we'd lose badly if that went to court. What about the engineers he mentored? Connor said, looking at Lionel. Brendan's been shadowing him for months. Brendan, can you handle a restart? Brendan looked like a deer in headlights. I've mostly been working on higher-level strategic mapping. Ethan owned the low-level implementation. Your director of strategic initiatives, Francis said. Are any of those initiatives operational competence? The architecture is complex, Brendan managed. There are historical constraints that, Francis shook her head. Connor, berating him won't bring payments back online. What's your concrete recovery plan? Lionel swallowed. We can try to build a new restart sequence by reverse engineering the dependencies. The team estimates several days to safely test it in staging, then roll out to production. We don't have days, Lena said flatly. We barely have hours. Every 60 minutes this continues, we lose direct revenue and intangibles, trust, credibility, market position. Our competitors are already calling our customers, another board member added, offering support with migration away from Northline. The notes from there devolved into blame circles. Who approved the leadership comp bans? Why hadn't anyone flagged Ethan as a single point of failure? Why wasn't there a critical talent retention plan? Why had nobody questioned a structure where a Harvard intern shadow made 60% more than the person they were learning from? By 4:30 p.m., the status page showed ongoing major incident at 3.5 hours. Merchants were publishing their own service updates, blaming upstream payment providers. A hashtag started trending among engineers, pay your reliability people. At 5:17 p.m., my phone rang. I was at Varison Labs finishing up my initial security brief when I saw the caller ID, Northline CFO. I stepped into a quiet hallway and answered. Ethan, this is Lena. I know today has been fraught. I'm calling to ask if there's any way we can engage you to help us through this incident. As an employee, I asked. We're open to arrangements, she said. Consulting, short-term contract, we can be flexible. I have a new job, I said. I start officially tomorrow. We're prepared to offer significant compensation for emergency work, she said. Name a number, we just need the system stabilized. For a brief second, I did the mental exercise. What would they say if I threw out an absurd number? It was tempting to watch them flinch, but the truth was simpler. I don't want your money, I said. There was a pause. I don't think I understand. That's the core of the problem, Lena, I said. I didn't leave because I wanted a particular number. I left because, for 11 years, the company treated reliability as an afterthought and the people who delivered it as replaceable. I asked for respect and fair treatment, not special treatment. You answered with accept it or leave. I chose leave. We're losing millions by the hour, she said quietly. You were losing millions in invisible risk for years, I said. You just didn't see it because I kept the system upright. I won't be your cheap insurance policy anymore. You decided what my work was worth. The system is delivering the invoice. You're angry, she said. We can. I'm not angry, I said. I'm finished. That's different. I hung up. By 6:00 p.m., they de-managed a partial recovery. The payment pipeline was accepting some traffic again, but the dashboards I designed, now public and archived, showed degraded performance and intermittent errors. They had treated the symptom, not the disease. At 8:00 p.m., the platform went down again, this time dragging inventory sync with it. Merchants couldn't see real stock levels. Customers got confirmation emails for items that didn't exist. Support centers melted under the load. The second call came later that night, relayed through a recruiter at a large consulting firm. Northline wanted to retain me for a single-day engagement at $50,000 to advise their team on stabilization. I declined without hesitation. My new CEO at Varison, a woman named Dr. Reina Basu who'd spent her early career carrying pagers herself, messaged me that night. Saw the news about Northline. If you need time, you've got it. Also, good on you for walking when they devalued you. If they come waving checks, my advice, let them learn the full lesson. By the end of the week, Northline's outage had cost them around $70+ million in lost transactions, penalties, and emergency vendor fees. 3 different consultancy crews tore through their architecture. None of them could fully reconstruct the odd dependencies and sequence knowledge I'd accumulated in that notebook. 2 weeks later, their biggest retail customer announced a phased migration to a rival platform. The public statement mentioned concerns about infrastructure resilience and incident response maturity. Other customers followed quietly. By the end of the quarter, Northline's stock price had dropped more than 30%. The board accepted the resignation of Connor. Lena stepped down to pursue new opportunities. The chief people officer was quietly reorganized out of her role, and the leadership development program was put on ice. Months later, I got a call from Frances, the board member who'd asked, "Where is Railton?" "Ethan, I owe you an apology," she said. "I spent the last 3 months reviewing your incident reports, your risk assessments, and your compensation history. You tried to tell this company in writing that they were one decision away from a catastrophe. They ignored you because they were dazzled by credentials." "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I want to ask something more," she continued. "We're rebuilding. We've brought in a new CTO who actually cares about systems. We're overhauling our engineering ladder and our retention strategy. I'd like you to consider serving as an external advisor to the board on reliability and culture, not to join as staff, to help us not make this mistake again." The offer was generous, but what mattered most was the framing, not save us, but teach us. I took a week, talked to Reina at Varison, and then agreed, with clear terms and boundaries. I wouldn't be on call. I wouldn't be their safety net. I'd be a voice in the room when they made decisions about how to treat the people who actually kept their promises real. Under new leadership, Northline changed. They implemented a technical career ladder where staff engineers could earn as much as directors. They added critical knowledge coverage as a board-level risk metric. They put documented runbooks and cross-training into bonus criteria. It was slow, imperfect work, but it was real. A couple of years later, over coffee, Raj, now VP of Infrastructure, told me something that made me laugh. "You know who applied here?" he said. "Brendan." "The Harvard kid?" I asked. He nodded. "Wanted to get back into hands-on technical work. Said he'd realized slide decks weren't the same as understanding the systems. We offered him a senior engineer role with a comp package lower than his old director pay, plus a clear growth path if he actually delivered." "What'd he say?" I asked. "He took it," Raj said. "He knows he's starting over. He's been humble, hungry, and asking good questions so far. Time will tell." That night, I dug out my old incident notebook. The last page held a single line I'd written on the day I left Northline. "Systems fail in predictable ways. Companies fail when they stop listening to the people who understand those systems. You only get to choose whether you learn that lesson before the failure or after. Northline chose after." It cost them tens of millions in a single week, 3 executives' jobs, a chunk of their customer base, and a reputation that will always carry a scar. The sweetest part of all this wasn't watching leaders get forced out or ignoring desperate 7-figure consulting overtures. It was knowing that every time they now design a reliable service, every time they discuss critical talent retention, every time someone in that building argues that expertise matters as much as pedigree, they're doing it in the shadow of one simple story. The day an underpaid engineer handed in a resignation letter with a smile, walked out at 12:45 p.m., and by 3:00 p.m. had unintentionally taught them exactly what his work was worth. They wanted me to understand why I was paid less because someone else had a Harvard MBA. By the end of that first afternoon, everyone upstairs understood perfectly. If this story hits a little too close to home, you're not alone. If you've ever been the person quietly holding things together while others collect the spotlight, let this be a reminder. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop cushioning the impact of other people's bad decisions. Protect your knowledge, respect your own value, and remember, walking away can be the loudest message you ever send. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.